Okay, hi everybody. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
So I'm Stephen Smagula, faculty in the Department of Psychiatry. And as Jen mentioned, I'm a translational neuroepidemiologist. I'll unpack that because it's unnecessarily fancy for, competing with other scientists and getting grants and stuff. So we call it something that sounds kind of cool. But all it really means is epidemiology. You guys obviously heard of COVID, right? An epidemiologist tries to figure out who's getting COVID, can we prevent it? So neuroepidemiology is just trying to figure out who's getting diseases that are affecting your brain or are related to your brain. And the translational part pertains to not just observing what's wrong, like how many people are sick, but also trying to figure out what can we do about it. So I specifically focus on sleep-wake patterns and mental health in older adults, although everything that I'm going to say today applies kind of no matter how old you are. So I'll get started with a disclosure. I'm PI on multiple grants from the NIH. I also have one grant from the NIH that's to a small business that I started for the sole purpose of developing a system to track sleep and rhythms. And I'll mention it at the end. And when I mention that, I'll put up this little symbol so you'll know I'm talking about the thing that technically I have a financial stake in, although I think you'll see I'm doing it for, again, that translational reason. So this is the outline of what we're going to cover today. So what's a sleep-wake cycle? What's a good sleep-wake cycle? It seems kind of obvious, and you might think, oh, I already know that, but there's a lot of details. Why does it matter? That's a quick section. It matters because if your sleep and your sleep-wake cycles are disrupted, this could make your health worse. What causes sleep-wake cycles? Well, those would be things like stress and diseases. People get sick, people get stressed. And how do you optimize it? Basically, you can't force yourself to sleep, but you can control things you do when you're awake. And so the way we treat our sleep is by doing sleep-friendly activity. And so that's the entire talk. And if that made sense to you, then I now have, I think, 40 minutes to convince you even more. And if it didn't make sense, I'll convince you. Okay. So what is sleep? Again, you might think sleep, everybody knows what sleep is, but then when you kind of go down to define it, it's a little bit of a head scratcher, right? What is this thing we're talking about? Well, it's repetitive, right? It's reversible. You go to sleep, you wake up, right? And it's not like you just go to sleep once. You're doing this every single day. Now, it's a behavioral state where you're not engaged with the world. And that might seem like a really bad thing to do, right? I'm thinking 70,000 years ago, probably don't want to be just totally shut off to the world around you. You might get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something, right? So we're not interacting with the world. We're not going out to get food. We're not procreating. We're not doing anything, right? So there's something important about sleep that obviously was so important that we and all other species that we, mammals at least that we know of, do this. So something's going on. And you may have heard of something called sleep stages before, that not all sleep is the same thing. So when you're awake, so this was all discovered initially in the 1930s. It disappeared for a while during World War II and then came back really strong after that. And what these scientists were doing is they attached electrodes to people's scalp and they recorded the electrical activity. And what they found was when people were awake, the brain waves looked like this. They were low amplitude, high frequency. So just firing lots of populations of brain cells just firing off. Now, when people start to fall asleep, there's actually distinct stages of sleep. It's not all one thing. So your light sleep are stages 1 and 2. And in these, you start seeing these higher amplitude, lower frequency types of activity emerging. And finally, you get what's called stage 4 or slow wave sleep. And this is when you get what's considered the really good deep sleep that may have some really good restorative properties. We also then go into something called rapid eye movement sleep. And people have known for a long time, this is when you dream. And so if you wake someone up in rapid eye movement sleep, they're much, much more likely to report that they were dreaming than any other stage. And this has been proven. Now, this whole cycle repeats in 90 minutes. So if you go to sleep for about 45 minutes, you'll be right there in your deep sleep. So it might be harder to wake up, right, if you're in really deep sleep. And if you're going to want to like have, optimal sleep wake time or an optimal time of napping, just keep in mind that this whole thing repeats every 90 minutes. But not exactly, because we tend to get all of our deep sleep early in the night. This is showing time. So this is someone who falls asleep around 11 p.m. and wakes up around 7 a.m., a pretty normal sleep-wake cycle for an adult. So you get most of your deep sleep in the early morning, the first third of the night. And then by the early morning hours, you're mostly in REM sleep. Now, throwing a lot of stuff at you, we'll see what sticks. And I will loop back. I'm telling you this for specific reasons. So I'll repeat it later. Okay, so sleep is not just what your brain is doing. It's not just the electrical, physiological activity of your neurons recorded at the scalp. That's part of it, right? But it has all these other things, right? Like, how long do you sleep? If you sleep less than, say, 7 hours a night, some people would consider that short sleep. Some people sleep even less than that. Now, on the other hand, some people sleep longer than, say, 9-10 hours every night. And some people would consider that long sleep. So we think the optimal duration is probably 7 to 8, but it really varies, right? So I personally probably prefer like 8, 8.5, but I know some people that are at 7 and they're fine. Now, this sleep is happening hopefully every night, and it has a certain not just duration to it, but when does it occur? Are you sleeping 11 till 7, or are you sleeping 2 till 10, right? You could have those same 8 hours of sleep timed at different parts of the day. It has an efficiency. You may be in bed for 9 hours, but only asleep for 4 hours. In contrast, you may be in bed for 6 hours and actually get 6 hours of sleep, and that might be fine. There's some other things about sleep you can't, no machine can measure, right? Like, how satisfied are you with your sleep? That's a subjective thing, and it's not the same thing as efficiency, and it's not the same thing as duration. How alert are you during the day? Or are you sleepy during the day? And does your sleep tend to happen at the same time every day? So Dr. Bicey, who has been one of my mentors, and I credit him with a lot, including in 2014, putting this out there to the field, that sleep is not just one thing. There's all these different characteristics of sleep, and we should think about it that way. So what I'm showing you now is moving beyond talking about what is just sleep, but here I'm saying, what is a sleep-wake cycle? So again, this one, the name is kind of inherent, like it's kind of obvious, right? What's a sleep-wake cycle? Well, let's look at the one on the top. Here's Monday, Tuesday at midnight, Wednesday at midnight. And can somebody just confirm you can see my cursor? Change my pointer to this. Okay, so on the top one, this is one person, and they're wearing a thing like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. It records their movement. And what you see here is actually that sleep. This is the period when, I'm sorry, so this is how active they are, and then this is time. So what you can see is that there's these periods where they're very inactive, that's when they're sleeping, and there's periods when they're awake, they're moving around. So this is actually what I'm referring to when I say a sleep-wake cycle, because we are 24-hour creatures evolved on a planet that's rotating with light-dark cycles, right? So we actually alternate sleep and wake. So sleep-wake cycle, while that might be completely obvious that sleep and wake follow a pattern, there's actually a lot of things that aren't so obvious about it. Like, it has a bunch of characteristics, like, again, like a timing. It also has an amplitude, and it has a regularity. So on the top, you see one person, they're sleeping till about 9, they're active, and then they're sleeping again. And it follows a regular pattern from day to day. All of these days look similar to each other. Now on the bottom, you see someone who's, if I told you that this was just random noise, random dots, you would believe me, right? You don't look at this and say, oh, I see a 24-hour rhythm. Does everybody see what I'm talking about? I see some people opt to turn their camera on, and we can see that the one on the top has a really robust sleep-wake cycle, and the one on the bottom, they're kind of sleeping sometimes, awake at sometimes. It's erratic. It's irregular. So that's a sleep-wake cycle. Why does this matter? Why do we Why do we care about sleep and sleep-wake cycles? And I promise you, this is the shortest of the 4 sections, because this is just like so easy, right? Because it affects your health. And if you don't care about your health, you're probably not on this call, right? You do care about your health. I can tell because you're here. So you care about your health. But even if you didn't care about your health, nobody wants to live a crummy life, right? And if your sleep-wake cycles are garbage, your life is going to be garbage. I'm sorry. It's just the truth, right? And so I can also cut to the chase of some of this again. And I study mood disorders and dementia in older adults. And I'm interested in cancer. I'm getting more involved in this type of research. And a pioneering researcher told me, when I asked him about sleep-wake cycles and dementia, he said, Stephen, do you want dementia? And I said, no, I don't want dementia, no. And he said, well, if you had dementia, do you want dementia plus jet lag? And that was it for me. I understood that you can have diseases, right? But having the sleep-wake disruption makes things worse on top of it. And so what I'm showing you here, I'm going to take another minute and just describe, because if you look at the health section of any newspaper, I guarantee you, look, I bet you at least once every 3 months, you're going to see an article in there that says sleep and circadian rhythms are related to some disease. Constantly, there's new scientific research linking sleep to all things bad. So I'm just going to say the things that kind of most pop out, although this is not a comprehensive list, are metabolism. If you are getting poor sleep, you will make worse food choices, particularly men, but this applies to both sexes. But it's great. You do these experiments, you put people in sleep lab, you don't let them get good sleep, and you put food in front of them, and sure enough, you can make people make terrible, terrible food choices. And this is happening in the real world too. Sleep is related to your immunity. You might not see skin here. You're like, oh, you listed every single organ system, right? But even your skin, right? If you have a cut on your hand and you're not sleeping well, it takes longer to heal. Your heart health. There's an important thing, I'll just say, going on with your cardiovascular function when you sleep. Your brain is literally clearing waste, clearing garbage out of itself when you were sleeping. Like your grandmother told you, sleep on it, because things that stress you out go away after a night of good sleep. You don't forget about the event, right? If I had a terrible interaction with someone, I was really stressed out about it, and then I slept, I still remember that interaction the next day. I'm just less emotional about it. And that's totally true. And we can prove it with lots of different types of scientific measures. And I just added this last one here because if you're sleepy during the day, you're probably going to miss out on some things. You're probably going to miss out on going to places and doing things that you normally would. And that's important. So I already showed you this. That was my whole slide on why is this important. Let me just move something real quick. Okay. So you believe me, this is important, hopefully. You believe me, sleep exists and it's got lots of characteristics. You believe me, that's important. What's causing people to have poor sleep? And so when I was doing my PhD in the Department of Epidemiology here at the University of Pittsburgh, there was this idea out there that my mentors and I didn't like. And the idea went something like this. People get older. When you get older, your sleep falls apart. You get crummy sleep, messes with your health, and it's just because you got older. And I'm just going to, before I even say another word, I don't even want this on the slide for another second. It's not true. It's not true. And I want that to be perfectly clear. It's not true. But if it were true, some people might think it's like something like this, right? The older you get, when you're young, when you're a baby, you're sleeping 10 hours a day. You're sleeping all the time. You sleep like a baby, right? People say that, right? And you're spending all this time asleep. You're getting so much of the deep sleep. You're getting a lot of the other sleep too, but you're not spending that much time lying awake in bed. You're kind of like either awake or you're asleep. That's it. The idea is that as you get older, your sleep becomes lighter. You're spending less time in the deep sleep, more time in the other stages of sleep. Maybe it's shifted earlier, maybe you're sleepier during the day. But when you go and you break down these data and you look at it, it really looks something like this. So here on the vertical axis is how long you're sleeping, total sleep time. So 600 minutes, so that's 10 hours. So this is 5 hours at the bottom, you know? So this is age. I apologize, it's kind of hard to see, but right about here is age 30. Right about here is age 60, and here's age 90. And each of these dots is actually a single study. And what this review did was it said, hey, guys, look, I can draw a line through this. Lo and behold, you get older, you spend less time sleeping. But this is normally where I'd want things to be a little more interactive, but I'm not gonna, it's late and this is not a science class, so I'm just gonna point a few things out, okay? First thing is, if you look after about age 30, there's not really much change, right? It's kind of like this huge drop up to age 30. The second thing, and I'll just go here, this is slow wave sleep. So it's the same kind of thing, but now this is the deep sleep. You can look over here at, say, some people who are 60, and you can have people who have more slow wave sleep than people over here who are 30. That is, after a certain point, there's actually more variability within any age group than across them. And so I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, well, this doesn't really support the idea that it's aging. What else is going on? Why are there some people who are 80 who are getting lots of slow wave sleep and some people who are 30 who are getting hardly any? Well, it's clearly not age. And so I did a systematic review, and we found there were only about 15 studies at the time that had looked at what predicts changes in sleep over time. And age was not a predictor of sleep getting worse. What was a predictor? Being sick, physical health problems, depression symptoms, and being a woman. Now, I think it's pretty easy to imagine how being sick and being depressed can make your sleep worse. But what bugged me and what bugged the science reviewers were, why is being a woman related to having worse sleep? Does anybody want to guess? I do want this to be interactive. I don't know the answer. I have some guesses myself, but I always think it's fun to see if anybody actually knows the answer.
Hormones.
Hormones. That's one of the things the scientific reviewer said. Totally. Hormonal changes, difference in hormones, something about being able to create another human inside you. It's a little more complicated than a man, right? So you have these other changes going on. Any other ideas?
Traditionally, women are the caregivers, and I think women tend to worry about things, and they're trying to, I think as we get older, we're kind of like sandwiched between maybe younger people and our grandchildren and elderly parents, so that we have a lot of balls in the air simultaneously.
You're 100% right. Those are the two things that I could think of and my mentors could think of. One, hormones, hormonal changes that can actually just disrupt your sleep straight up. The second thing is the role of women in our society. Maybe they have a lot more stuff to do than the men. Maybe they have a lot more things to worry about than the men. And so this is what we think is going on. So thank you for the two people who spoke up. I think that's spot on. And I will say this is not an academic group here, but those are the exact same things that all the academics said. Okay, so it's not aging that's making people sleep worse. It's actually that this is a cycle. And this has a chance to be a very vicious cycle where people get sick and it's actually going to make their sleep worse. Their sleep gets worse. It makes their health worse. But of course, this is supposed to be a happy talk today, right? This is not a scary picture because it goes the other way too, right? So how can we optimize our sleep? So there's some things called sleep hygiene rules and everybody should do them. And this is the first line of defense. The first thing is, you can look these up. There's lists of them everywhere. It's called sleep hygiene. I think they're changing it now. So the language, I like the term sleep hygiene, but I think people are going more towards like healthy tips for promoting healthy sleep. So they're all the same. Wake up at the same time every day. You should not have caffeine after lunch. This is a very good rule of thumb. Like, and if it's a lunch at 4 o'clock, don't have caffeine then. Don't have caffeine after like 2 o'clock. Avoid nicotine. You shouldn't be smoking anyway. It's a stimulant. It makes it harder to sleep. Avoid alcohol late in the evening. Note, this is not Dr. Smagula saying get drunk in the afternoon. You should not be abusing alcohol anyway. But certainly it's gonna disrupt your sleep. It might make you feel like you're falling asleep better, but it will lead to worse sleep at other points in the night. So your room should be a cool place, a little cold. It should be dark, and you don't want it to be loud. Hopefully you can control that. It is important for it to be a little cooler. And for this point, I like to also think like it's a sanctuary, right? I think these are, so only go to bed when you're sleepy. Your bedroom is a place you go when you're sleepy. Keep that in mind. Get out of bed if you can't fall asleep. And if you have anxiety, don't lay in bed with those anxieties. Those anxieties do not enter the bedroom, okay? If you have them while you're in the bed, you get up, go to another room, write the anxieties down over there. Some people like to rip it up and then throw it away and go to bed, but I keep my list of things that I need to do, and it's outside the bedroom, and I don't let myself think of them in the bedroom. So for a lot of people, that's going to work, but many people will still have sleep problems. And I have to mention sleep medicines because people ask. You can think of them as kind of like sleeping pills and then the antihistamines. I'll start on the bottom first, things like Benadryl. Some people will take these to help themselves sleep better. I guess it's good that they're cheap and that you don't need a prescription. However, they can have serious side effects. So some of these antihistamines have been linked with dementia risk, specifically anticholinesterase inhibitors. You don't want to be taking these. Same thing with the sleeping pills. Yeah, they're approved by the FDA, sure, but there's concerns about long-term abuse and dependence. You really don't want to be using these a long time. Now, the two major sleep societies in the world, the European and the American sleep societies, now recommend behavioral treatments as the first line. They do not recommend taking sleep medicines as the first line of treatment for insomnia type complaints. And to understand like what is this behavioral treatment? It's kind of like the sleep hygiene kind of alluded to it a little bit, but the behavioral treatments for insomnia are like more of a structured program where you're going to be getting more coaching and more help. So to understand the behavioral treatments, I have to explain to you two things about what controls sleep. The first is called sleep drive. Sleep drive is proportional to how long you've been awake. And you can think of it like the hourglass, right? If you flip this hourglass over right now, all the sand's going to go down to the bottom, right? It's ready. It's ready to be flipped. It's ready for the sand to go. But if it was empty on the one side and you flip it, it wouldn't do anything. Like this one right here, it's not doing anything, right? Same with a rubber band, right? A rubber band, you have to stretch it and then it snaps back, right? If you just put the rubber band on the table, it doesn't snap. It has to be stretched out and then it can. So sleep drive is just like that. Sleep drive is proportional to how long you've been awake. The more sleep drive you have, the more deep sleep. That is, the more slow wave sleep you get. So a good way to think about this is think about how long since you've woken up. And we'll just do a thought experiment. If you wake up at 8 a.m. and you try to go to sleep, say 4 hours later at noon, or even say 8 hours later at 4 p.m., you're not going to get very much deep sleep, right? But if you stay up, you're going to be able to much, much later in the day, right? And if you stay up even more, right? If you stay up 24 hours, you're going to get a really deep sleep. And this is not like, this is theory, but this has actually like been proven in a series of experiments. It was originally written by people in the 70s on a barroom napkin. Two scientists, a husband and wife, had this realization that sleep drive is one of the main factors controlling sleep. And they could prove it with experiments too, because what they would do is they'd have people sleep after, like I just said, they'd do this experiment and they'd have people sleep after being awake for certain amounts of time. And the longer they were asleep, the more of that slow wave sleep they got. So I want to point out on the bottom here, though, that sleep dissipates sleep drive. So you build up a sleep drive, you fall asleep, you get a lot of slow wave sleep. Now, if you had stayed up till, you woke up, let's do another scenario. Let's say you woke up at noon, really late, and then you took a nap some hours later. That would lower your sleep drive a little bit. So sleep drive is something you want to harness. but it's not the only thing controlling sleep. If anybody's ever stayed up the entire night, you'll know about sleep drive, right? You feel the sleep drive getting bigger and bigger and bigger but it doesn't go on, right? Until right around dawn, right? Right around the time the sun comes up, all of a sudden you're not getting as sleepy anymore. What's going on here? If it was just sleep drive, then it would just accumulate and you would just fall asleep, or it would just keep getting worse and worse and worse. Something acts against sleep drive. The other thing is, if sleep drive was the only factor controlling our sleep, we would all be on different schedules. You might be having your sleep drive peaking at 8 p.m. Mine might be 8 a.m. We'd all be on different schedules. We're social species. We work together. So how is this going to work out? Well, we evolved a thing called a circadian rhythm. And circadian rhythms are coordinated by a master clock in the brain. But we also have circadian rhythms in every cell of our body. Now, this internal circadian rhythm tells our bodies when to do what. Like, when's a good time to eat and digest things? When should we be awake and alert? When should we fall asleep? And so these circadian rhythms coordinate important bodily functions. Now, it's not just, though, that we have this kind of static clock, it adapts. So if you've ever traveled across the country or across the world, you'll get there and your body will think it's the daytime when it's the nighttime. But after a certain time of being exposed to that light environment and that social structure, that timing, that in that new time zone, you adapt. So we have an internal clock that keeps us on track, but it's set by the external cues. So this is the whole punchline of the whole talk, which is the premise for the behavioral interventions that exist, that are here in Pittsburgh. They are online as well. You can get these treatments if you need them. They work by harnessing, building up your sleep drive and strengthening circadian rhythms. And how do you do that? Well, to build up sleep drive, you stay active longer. So somebody comes to the sleep doctor and says, "Doc, I can't sleep. What should I do?" And they say, "Okay, what time do you go to bed?" "I try to go to bed at midnight every day. Sleep's important." And you say, "Well, what time do you actually fall asleep?" 3 o'clock. And then I have to get up at 7 for work. The doctor says, "Stay up till 3 o'clock. And how do you think you're going to feel at 3 o'clock? "Well, I'm going to feel really tired because I don't normally stay up that long." So build up that sleep drive by staying up longer and avoiding or managing naps. The other thing is that sleep's not voluntary. Sleep, being awake, is voluntary. You can force yourself to stay awake to pretty extreme limits. You cannot, no matter what you do, force yourself to fall asleep. So don't stay in bed and let yourself get frustrated because you're just making associations like that your bed is a place where you stress out. Now, it might be that you build up sleep drive and you're like really have a lot of sleep drive, but you still can't sleep. And that's when you might want to try other approaches like journaling for anxiety, taking mindfulness classes, treat or control the problems that make it so that you can't sleep. And now another thing that comes up a lot in the stroke population or in people who have any sort of medical illness or comorbidities, you might want to build up your sleep drive and you might think, "Hey, that's a great idea," but you just can't do it. You're just exhausted during the day, right? And so you just say, "Oh, I'm going to just try to do something like watching TV," right? Or maybe you feel bad about it, so you think about your stress. While it might seem like I'm tired, I don't have a lot of energy, so I need to do something like this, actually the reverse is true. That actually activities that use up a lot of our energy also give us a lot of our energy. So they can be energizing. In terms of setting a good, strong circadian rhythm, you want to get up at the same time every day. Light comes through the eye straight to the internal master clock. Light is the strongest Zeitgeber or time cue that exists. So if you get a lot of bright light in the morning, that'll tell your body, this is when I should be getting going and alert. It'll strengthen your circadian rhythm. On the contrary, if you're sitting in front of a really bright blue TV screen 18 inches from your head in the middle of the night, that could trick your body into thinking now is the time I'm supposed to be up and alert. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground. I'm just going to wrap up. If anybody listens to this, the thing is, hearing this information is going to be great. I hope it's going to be helpful to a lot of you. Some of you may need more, and there's more formal structured programs out there, such as brief behavioral treatment for insomnia, which again focuses on reducing the amount of time you spend in bed. stabilizing your wake time. So you're always waking up at the same time. People always will say, I need to get good sleep. And so they'll give themselves a bedtime. However, you might get into bed and feel very frustrated because you're not sleepy and you're not able to fall asleep. It's much more important to give yourself a wake time, because over time, by having that consistent wake time, you'll give yourself more time to build up sleep drive and you'll strengthen your circadian rhythm. That's what you'll do in this BBTI program, Brief Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia. There's other things you can do if you're having like a lot more trouble. Say you're doing all the activity stuff, but you're having a lot of trouble with your feelings and your negative thinking. There's trainings you can do to build up like sort of the muscle to interrupt that and bring it back. And same thing, MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, is a wonderful therapy. It's not really therapy, it's like a health promotion program that I've done. And it really helps you stay in the moment and accepting of the current moment. So this could help you with your sleep. It could also help you with a lot of other things. So I just have to stop on the morning time for 1 second, because I haven't always been a morning bird, but I actually, just through my research, have found that it's incredibly important. What you do in the morning sets the tone for the whole day. I've mentioned, hopefully it makes sense, how if you're getting up sufficiently early at the same time, it builds your sleep drive. It can help strengthen your circadian rhythm, especially if you're getting a lot of light. But remember when I was talking about REM sleep before and the different sleep stages? You get a lot of REM sleep in the early morning hours. It's controlled by a circadian rhythm. So your body says, hey, it's early morning hours. You're trying to sleep. Let's do REM sleep. It's also controlled by homeostatic factors. You've already gotten rid of your sleep drive, right? You got your deep sleep in the first third of the night. You got rid of your sleep drive. It's gone. What are you going to do now? You're going to do REM sleep. Well, REM sleep is associated with your emotional memories kind of consolidating. But if you have REM sleep in the morning hours and it's interrupted because you're stressed or you're in pain, that crummy REM sleep could actually be worse for how you're feeling than no sleep at all. And it's true, if you take people and you stress them out, give them a good night of sleep, they tend to wake up in the morning feeling better. If you mess with their REM sleep, you have them kind of try to stay in bed, try to keep sleeping, and we know it's going to be REM sleep, it actually makes their emotions worse and they feel more stressed out. So the other thing is, I think if that doesn't make sense to you, another way to say it is sometimes we sulk in bed. Sometimes you wake up and you think to yourself, my life stinks. I don't want to get my day started. So we try to avoid it by sleeping a little more. And I think that as these pictures kind of depict, you can use that time. You're not going to get that great of sleep, say after 6 or 7 or 8, depending on what you tend to do. So use those morning hours, seize that time in the morning for yourself. I want us to have some discussion. So I'm going to skip this. I'm just going to show you this. This is the thing that I mentioned as a potential conflict of interest, because it is an app. It's freely available. I'm not profiting off this at all. But this is what I've been developing with several grants and things over the last 5 years. So you've heard of Fitbit in this group, right? And you've probably heard of Apple Watch. What these things do is they track your sleep and they track your activity, but they don't track your circadian rhythm. They do not track the 24-hour patterning. And so having noted in my research that this 24-hour pattern is really important to health outcomes, I wanted to give people a way of tracking these 24-hour patterns. And so we get the data off the watch. This is what the app looks like. It gives you scores, graphs. This little star system is just to help people remember to wear it and get the data. On the back end, on the web portal, you can see different characteristics and scores. So we are using this now in interventions where we give these to people who have sleep problems about their sleep, but also problems about kind of their routine and staying awake and alert as much as they'd like during the day. And we do those behavioral interventions, but we tailor it based on how their what their feedback looks like here. In terms of cancer patients, cancer survivors, there's 3 areas of research on sleep-wake cycles that are big. One is depression, one is dementia, and the third literature that's really grown in this area is cancer. And There's all sorts of weird, funky measures that scientists use to kind of quantify the difference between the top and the bottom, which again, the top is a strong pattern. They're active during the day, they're resting at night, it follows a pattern. And the bottom is a weak one. Having this weak one is linked with having worse quality of life. And actually, it's been shown to be linked with worse chemotherapy outcomes and worse survival. Now, I don't know if that's because the people with the worst patterns are the sickest to begin with, or if actually that worst pattern made things worse. But I do know for sure that having this worst pattern is more depressing. It's worse to live with this pattern than the one on the top. So I think if that hasn't motivated you enough, hopefully you believe me that sleep and health are inextricably tied, that we can't force ourselves to sleep, but we want to optimize our sleep. And the way we do that is by controlling when we're awake. I hope you guys can sleep like this baby and this monkey and this tiger and all these other animals. We all need sleep. It feels really good to have a nice, refreshing night's sleep. So I will stop there and we can do questions. Jen, can you guide me? Do we want to read off the chat or